Authoritarian regimes keep the church silent through force. In America, many churches stay silent by choice. What are the consequences?
Phyllis Schlafly and her special guest have answers during the next hour. We welcome you once again to Eagle Forum Live with Phyllis Schlafly, each week bringing you the most important issues of our time along with top guests to discuss them. Well, Adolf Hitler once said the church must be separate from the state. Politics do not belong in the church. Does that sound like some Democratic politicians you know? One thing is certain, the price of staying silent about what matters is a high price. In just a bit, of course, we'll be looking forward to questions and comments from around the country. Now, revved up, ready to go, back in the studio once again, Phyllis Schlafly.
And here in America, political correctness and religious freedom are not seen to be compatible. Which one is it going to be? Political correctness or liberty? I have a guest named David Fiorazo. He's an author and writer. He's been involved in Christian ministry for 25 years, and he's the author of a new book, The Cost of Our Silence, Consequences of Christians Taking the Path of Least Resistance. Welcome, David Fiorazo.
Good morning, Phyllis. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, this is a very important job, and we seem to face it every day. It was a big shock to me when we had about 6 months of all the pundits talking about the marriage amendment that was soon to come down by the Supreme Court. And I didn't hear a single pastor say, well, let us bend our knees in prayer to make sure it's a good decision. And they were silent.
That's an excellent point, though I want to say pastors have a greater responsibility than the majority of Christians because we need to individually make sure that we are living according to the teachings of the Bible and serving Christ first and foremost, but they will be held accountable for what they preach and what they do not preach. And that's an excellent point about prayer because I think our weakness in prayer as a church in America has led to the weakness of our nation. Many times, especially on the 4th of July or on the National Day of Prayer, we are very open about shouting out 2 Chronicles 7:14, with God saying, if my people called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin and heal their land. Well, it's great to quote that, but let me ask you this. How many decades now have we been quoting that verse, and why don't we see change in our culture? My conclusion is that we aren't really living that out and repenting. And I'm not talking about people who do not believe necessarily. They need the gospel. They need to hear the good news of Jesus Christ that can save them. I'm talking about the church who has grown lukewarm and silent. We've reached a point where political correctness refuses to coexist with religious freedom in America. And I wrote a chapter in the book called Ducking the Issue of Sin.
Nobody wants to talk about sin. That's not a very pleasant subject.
Exactly. And we've also reached the point where even Christian leaders are backing out of culture because they want to go along with what's popular, but not with what Christ commanded us to do, which is basically what Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. He said not to speak is to speak and not to act is to act. Of course, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the confessing church during Hitler's Germany, probably about 1/3 of the pastors who stood against Hitler. But Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty, I wrote a little update on the story where he actually was just paraphrasing 1 Corinthians 6:9-11, talking about the different people, different types of sinners in this passage that will not inherit the kingdom of God. My question is, why was he lampooned? Why was he attacked viciously by the media, by liberals, by the left, and even by some in our government? And the answer is pastors, religious leaders, and everyday Christians have not been sharing Scripture, not been talking about sin and what's happening, the immorality in America. We've not been talking about this for decades.
You describe increasing hostility toward Christ in every aspect of our culture. What do you attribute this to?
A good portion is our silence. This goes back probably about 50 years, Phyllis. I know you've written a lot about what's happening in our education system. I mean, it has influenced every part of our culture, and we've got to wake up to the fact that this is not the same America that our grandparents or great-grandparents appreciated and lived in. It has changed dramatically, and part of it is due to the silence of the church. And I also want to mention the influence that came into the United States of America through people such as Antonio Gramsci. He was the leader of the Communist Party of Italy. he had a theory about grinding the morality of a culture down to destroy its foundation. And he thought of it as a long evolutionary march through the major institutions in America.
Well, a lot of people think he was quite a predictor. He knew what he was talking about.
He did, and it's evil. Let me clarify. It is very evil, but the enemy uses those who are willing to submit to him and do the enemy's work. I think Stalin called them useful idiots. But Gramsci was brilliant in his mind and in his theory because it has worked in America. Most socialists and communists knew at that 100 years ago or more that America would never fall militarily. We were too strong and we had too much pride. But if you would infiltrate the culture with immorality...
You've worked in the broadcasting and entertainment industries for 30 years. What's your perspective of the media? Are they with us or against us?
The media is absolutely against us. I've even looked at surveys of their own admission where they would actually willingly take a survey on their worldview. For example, on abortion, about 90 to 95% of those in the media profess to be pro-choice. It's a culture of death. The media also promotes gay marriage. They are also very, very open to socialism, which is fascinating. So everything that this president, President Obama, has implemented pretty much since 2009, the media has kind of been his protector. And so, no, we have not heard the truth from our own media, who, as you know, was created to hold government accountable.
You talk a lot about something called the Johnson Amendment. Now, I think I know a lot of history, but somehow I don't remember that. What was the Johnson Amendment?
This is in a chapter in my book called The Separation of Christianity and State, which, as you and I know, that's not in our Constitution, but that is a political theory, really, that the left uses and a lot of people have bought into as truth. The Johnson Amendment happened in 1954. Lyndon Johnson was a liberal senator running for re-election in Texas. Some conservative groups and anti-communist groups were coming against him, speaking out against him, and these were nonprofit groups. He went to the IRS to find out if what they were doing was legal, and the IRS said, yeah, they have every right to speak out. It's free speech. They can talk about any kind of political issue they need to. And so what he did, during that time, there was a massive tax code overhaul bill that was being debated on the Senate floor. What Johnson did is slip in this amendment to the 501c3 status, the nonprofit status, in this massive bill, and it was probably not as big as the 2010 Obamacare, the health care bill.
I'll let you pick up right there, David Fiorazo.
We want to hear the rest of the story.
Yeah, in just a second. And we also want to invite callers into the conversation right now. 800-736-3202 on Eagle Forum Live. You're listening to Eagle Forum Live with Phyllis Schlafly, discussing the most important issues of concern to you and your family every week. And if you'd like to call in and talk, Phyllis and her special guest this week would love to have you join us at 800-736-3202. 1-800-736-3202. Once again, here's Phyllis.
And our guest today is David Fiorazo, who's talking about the cost of silence, of Christians staying silent. And before we went to the break, you were describing the Johnson Amendment. Will you please explain for our listeners who also don't remember it?
Lyndon Johnson flipped this into this tax code overhaul bill they were debating in 1954. Of course, the amendment was passed by Congress. There were no legislative hearings on it, from what I've read and understood. So this limited what people were able to do as far as nonprofits participating in, intervening in any political campaign in opposition to or promoting. And what pastors and churches did not understand at that point was they didn't think they could say anything. And that was a catalyst in our history, Phyllis, where Christian churches and our other denominations and nonprofit groups kind of backed out of culture a little bit, and the left continues to use that nonprofit status to bully Christian pastors today. But my point is, many Christian leaders at that time chose not to speak about cultural, about social issues, about morality, because of ignorance or because of fear of what might happen if they were to speak from the public.
Yes, I think they were all afraid of losing their tax exemption.
Yes, but at the same time, we understand, to my knowledge, there has never been a pastor or Christian leader who has lost their nonprofit status for saying anything about abortion or God-ordained marriage or other things. But yet, pastors and nonprofits are still hesitant to speak out because of what the left and what the media might do.
And that's the silence that you think is so wrong.
It's brought us to the place we are today where in Isaiah 5:20, I believe, in the Bible it says, what's good is called evil and what's evil is called good. And this is the culture we now live in. So we still have a choice whether we can speak up today, because our country will continue going down this road until more believers get up. And yes, it's not popular, but we are called to be ambassadors for Christ, not secret agents.
David Fiorazo, Phyllis Schlafly, we are ready for calls at 800-736-3202. Every week we get a number of email questions, including Candace from Raleigh, North Carolina. What is the point of Common Core, and what's it intended to do? Maybe both of you can have at that right now. You first, Phyllis.
Eagle Forum has pledged that it's asking candidates this year to take that they will oppose Common Core because we think it is so generally opposed by parents all over the country.
I wrote an entire chapter on that. It was one that I had to research quite heavily on, but what I found out was absolutely astounding when it comes to UNESCO and the UN influence, socialism being infused in our public education system, and how Bill Gates and wealthy elites really pushed this through. They had it all ready to go when the perfect storm happened, when Barack Obama was elected. Fisher Ames, author of the First Amendment, made this statement in the year 1800 in regards to education in America. He said, "We've become accustomed of late to putting little books in the hands of children containing fables with moral lessons." He said, "We are spending less time in the classroom on the Bible, which should be the principal text in our schools. The Bible states these great moral lessons than any other man-made book." And here we have the influence of John Dewey in America and on our public schools, and Christians and religious leaders for over 50 to 60 years have never even batted an eye, or some have. I do want to give credit to those who are trying to raise awareness about the government-run schools in America. But a recent testimony before the Colorado State Board of Education last November, a Chinese immigrant and mother of three came out and said, Common Core, in my eyes, is the same thing as the communist core I once saw in China when I grew up under Mao's regime. Now, these are striking comments from someone who lived under that kind of oppression, and she's concerned about the nationalized testing, curriculum, and indoctrination.
Common Core has certainly been a target of what Eagle Forum has been doing in the last few years, and it is amazing the way groups of moms all over the country have risen up to try to get Common Core out of the schools. As a matter of fact, Eagle Forum has been trying for years to get federal control out of the schools. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows the federal government to run our schools and to dictate the standards or what they're teaching. And yet they're doing it anyway. And, of course, they tell you that Common Core isn't federal, but it is national, and they are putting it through with a lot of money.
Yeah, and as we start implementing some of the Common Core required technologies in our classrooms and schools as well, Microsoft is going to make out like a bandit. You know, it was John D. Rockefeller who said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. And we see this being played out now. This is what they're going for. It is all about control. Joy Pullman of the Heartland Institute said people who characterize Common Core as anything other than a national takeover of schooling are either unaware of those sweeping implications or they're deliberately hiding this information from the public. We just need to continue to get the word out and encourage people, especially parents who tend to always give our government or the public schools the benefit of the doubt. We cannot do that anymore. It's too far gone, Phyllis, and you know that more than a lot of people.
David, we have another caller here at 1-800-736-3202, 800-736-3202. Andy is listening in Morristown, New Jersey.
Hello, Andy. Welcome.
Hi. I wanted to point out that in Houston, the churches do speak out, and they've exercised a lot of leadership there, and they helped defeat...
Oh, they had a big election recently, didn't they?
They did, and they helped beat back a liberal referendum on granting all these new special privileges based on sexual orientation. The church has led the way in Houston to defeat that referendum. And on referendum, generally churches have a lot more freedom to speak out. So there are a lot of controversial issues that are on the ballot. Churches have, I think, complete freedom to speak out about and against ballot initiatives. And David, if you could comment on that.
Yes, and thank you so much for your call and your comment. And I want to repeat what he said. Churches have an incredible amount of freedom to speak out. Houston, that's a really good example because that was overwhelmingly defeated. So we need to take a little page out of Houston's playbook there, but we don't see that happening as a whole throughout the country where churches and Christian citizens are speaking out. But thank God they had a vote because we can speak. The First Amendment, the freedom of religious expression, you take that away, that's one of the core values of our freedoms.
Well, American churches do have a big amount of freedom to impact politics and culture. What are some of the freedoms that the churches and pastors don't take advantage of?
You can do almost anything, even from the church pulpit, other than endorsing a political candidate. You cannot say vote for Ted Cruz or vote for whoever.
But you can say vote for the pro-life candidate.
You can even draw a comparison. This person stands for abortion. This person stands for life. This person stands for socialism. This person stands for capitalism. You can go down. You can pass out voter guides. You can hold voter registrations in churches. You can talk about, quote, social issues. And Phyllis, this is an area where I'm very passionate about because every social issue is a moral issue. You can find information in the Bible on how Christians actually respond to these issues. But people have backed out saying social issues are too controversial. We better not say anything. There's information in the Bible about these issues, such as life in the womb, what God determines life. We better be talking about it because the left is winning that argument based on our silence.
Well, who benefits from the false idea that Christianity and the government should be completely, totally separated?
Those who aim to eradicate Christianity from America.
Well, that's hard to do if they've read all the works of the Founding Fathers. They're all mentioning their Christian faith.
As you know, history has been rewritten and continues to be, and the history classes, what they're being taught in schools today, are a far cry from what it was 50 to 75 to 100 years ago, because it's been a gradual whittling away and a dumbing down of America. Here's an interesting point also, Phyllis. They say that, you shouldn't be able to talk about religion in public schools, but it's interesting that it seems that Christianity is the only religion that's prohibited.
David Fiorazo visiting today with Phyllis Schlafly, and he's the author of The Cost of Our Silence, Common Core, Judicial Tyranny, Abortion, and more on the list of things you can't afford to be quiet about. Stay tuned and join in the conversation. We'd love to have you join us right now at 800-736-3202. 1-800-736-3202 right here on Eagle Forum Live. By the way, you can join Phyllis anytime online at eagleforum.org.
The Phyllis Schlafly Report is a unique newsletter that is in its 42nd year of monthly publication. Phyllis Schlafly writes about topics that are so important to you, your family, and your family's future. You can request a sample report at any time. Recent issues on education include how to train our leaders to be conservative, the radical resolutions passed by the National Education Association, and liberal plans to subvert the U.S. Constitution. Other reports cover such vital topics as what's happening on college campuses, how the public schools are turning out liberals, the rising costs of tolerating illegal aliens, and Congress must curb activist judges. The Phyllis Schlafly Report is the best bargain in print. It's full of useful information you can use to write your congressman and educate your friends. Get a free sample by calling 1-800-736-3202. That's 1-800-736-3202. Or online, go to eagleforum.org.
Today we're talking about the cost of ordinary Christians being silent about the attacks on our faith. And even a lot of pastors are silent. And we have a guest, David Fiorazo, who's been talking about the cost of that silence. Mm-hmm. And what do you think are the major consequences of Christians taking the path of least resistance?
And we'll ask some of our listeners that very question, and we'll see what some of our listeners have on mind here today on Eagle Forum Live with Phyllis Schlafly. Next up is St. Louis. Here's Rick. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Rick. Hello.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Go ahead.
Okay, I knew a priest in the 70s who told me that there was absolutely no chance of him being promoted in the church because he was not a socialist. Now, I believe that what's really going on with the clergy is that they're going by what they really believe inside, and they get that from the seminaries. The real question is Christ a Marxist? Was he a collectivist? Was he a communist? It's the easiest theology in the world to slide into some BS situation like that, but that is really the question that I think we have to ask as Christians. Many people believe that Christianity is socialism, collectivism, an end to private property, welfareism everywhere.
This comes with some of the confusion in our country today with socialism being implemented, social justice policies being implemented under the guise of compassion. We have a responsibility as Christians to be compassionate to our neighbors, to our brothers and sisters. Our responsibility as Christians individually is not the same as our government responsibilities. Jesus never advocated the Roman government to help the poor. He said, church, that's your job. Love your neighbor, help the poor. But when the church here in America locks our arms with government under the guise of helping the poor or doing anything, for charity, then we cannot preach the gospel because the government says, no, it's separation of church and state. You cannot evangelize. That's one of our first callings as believers to evangelize. So the government has to do their own thing, but their responsibility is to take care of the American people, not to do compassionate work. The church should do compassionate work. So there's this misunderstanding of so-called social justice issues, and I'll tell you that social justice that I've seen promoted in the last 5 to 10 years is apostasy. It's a departure from the faith. It is not biblical Christianity.
There are a lot of people now who are trying to claim that accepting all these immigrants from all of these Muslim countries is part of our Christian duty or our American traditional duty. What do you think on that?
We are one of the most generous nations in the world, if not the most generous and compassionate. But we already have a debt. We already have welfare that's increasing to record levels.
Most of the immigrants who are coming in are going right on welfare.
Yes, and this is, some people say, it's the compassionate thing to do. Well, let me bring it down to an individual decision. In your house, would you welcome strangers in and just take care of them? Well, maybe some Christians would, but others would say, no, we can't afford it. Well, why couldn't we say the same thing about our government, who is supposed to be responsible with the people's tax money? They're supposed to take care of us and defend us, not make us even more susceptible by building up that debt and taxing the people, because eventually our taxes will go up. And in that sense, we are being forced as citizens to take care of people that most people probably don't want to take care of.
David, a number of callers here on the toll-free 800-736-3202. Hello, Tim in Nashville, Tennessee.
Hello, Tim. Welcome.
Hello. I just want to make a comment about the church's silence. It makes me think of a person asleep in a chair, and all these alarms are going off around him, and they continue to sleep until it's too late. And that's my comment.
Well, I think that's a good analogy. I think a lot of Americans are asleep about this issue. And we thank Ann Coulter for her book and Trump for talking about it to alert people to the danger of the large numbers of immigrants coming in, including young men of fighting age who are ready to continue their mischief in this country.
Hi, Billy, Springfield, Missouri, the next stop, listening to Bott Radio Network. Good to have you, Billy.
Hi, Billy.
Hello. I'm going back to the Common Core. I've been homeschooling for about 15 years.
Good for you.
And anyway, it's a blessing. But I want to say kind of more of a comment. God calls us to be set apart as believers. And how are we going to raise a generation for the Lord and stand up for their faith if we're putting our children in public schools for 7+ hours a day, being, brainwashed is the right word, but, taught things that are against our faith? How can we expect them to stand up in this culture?
Well, I personally think it's too hard for them to stand up against it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, what about that, David?
That's an excellent point. And even Christian parents, the most well-meaning Christian parents, might say, well, our kids, we're raising them going to church, and we're going to send them to the public schools as missionaries in a pagan culture.
No, that won't work at all.
That's difficult enough for an adult who works in a secular job to even speak about their faith or be missionaries there. But we're going to send our kids into this culture where it's now a culture in the public schools that's hostile toward Christianity. And think about the hours of influence. It's a very important concept parents have to understand. They're with you for 20 minutes in the morning during breakfast, and then they go to school for 7 to 8 hours a day. They're with their friends. They're in an education system that allows any other religion or thought or worldview other than biblical Christianity, and then they come home for supper, and then they're on social media all day and what they're getting from the actual media in America, plus primetime television, which I call soul pollution. So the hours of influence our young Christian kids are getting, it's already completely lopsided. So Christian parents must, like she said, yes, homeschooling is one of the best things you can do if you want to strengthen your kids. Think about Deuteronomy chapter 6. The Israelites said, I believe it's 6 verse 9, that says you will teach them the ways, you will talk about the word when you sit up, when you walk about the way, when you lie down. So it says instruct the kids in the word and talk about the word of God.
Homeschooling is difficult for a lot of people, but I do urge parents to at least homeschool for the first grade, because the biggest scandal of our public school system is that it lets kids go through year after year and never learn how to read. And if you faithfully take your child through my book, First Reader, which is available, sold thousands of copies, that means that your child will be able to read. In fact, I know one family that didn't know me when their now 11-year-old was reading age, but now that they have a 5-year-old, they're teaching my child to read with First Reader. And the 5-year-old is now teaching the 11-year-old how to read. So nothing is so important. You've got to be able to read the great books that are in English literature and English history if you're going to be an informed American.
Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hi, Omar. Good to have you on Eagle Forum Live. Please
Hi,
go right
Omar.
ahead.
Welcome.
Hi, Phyllis. I disagree with one thing your guest said. You said that we should not send our children to public schools because they can't really witness there. But what environment gets more hostile than, say, the Middle East, ISIS, cutting off heads? There's witnessing going on there. Jesus never said witnessing is going to be easy or popular, but it's got to be done. And if you pull the kids out of the public school, there's no witness at all. So I really, I've seen it in my 35-year career, many Christian kids who are witnesses either by word or by action.
Thank you.
Well, good for those kids, but they are unusual. I saw an interview with one of these talk show people last night on television, and he was interviewing kids on the street about historical events, and none of them gave the right answer. Who discovered America? When was it? Some of the simple questions like that, and they simply couldn't cope.
Yes, and I want to clarify, thank you for that call. I did not say that it is impossible or it can't be done. What I am saying is parents, Christian parents particularly, need to make that decision knowing what kind of environment they are sending their kids into. But of course, we are called to be salt and light, and there's no other, public education is dark. So that is an area where young Christian kids, if they're raised right at home, they may well have an impact even on their teachers. And there are some Christian teachers in the education system, and they do need our prayers.
Our guest today is David Fiorazo, and we thank him for his input on these important issues that are interesting to all parents.
Phyllis, you ready to squeeze in some more callers here?
Yes.
We've got them teed up on the 800 line, 800-736-3202. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself, so said Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a man who lost his life opposing the Nazi regime. What happens when Christians chicken out and take the path of least resistance? Today, David Fiorazo has more with Phyllis Schlafly. They're discussing the cost of silence. And again, we're working in just as many questions and comments as possible at 800-736-3202. Every once in a while, too, we squeeze in an email question from eagleforum.org. And it's at eagleforum.org that you can catch past radio programs and plenty of Phyllis's articles. Coast to coast, you're listening to Eagle Forum Live with well-known conservative commentator Phyllis Schlafly, with you every week discussing the most important issues of concern to your family. And today's guest is David Fiorazo. He's the author of a new book called The Cost of Our Silence. Are you willing to opt out of the easy road and speak out against evil? Are you willing to push back against deception? Today's guest has the answers, and of course we work in just as many questions and comments as possible on 800-736-3202. Let's see what Jim has on mind. Welcome to Eagle Forum Live, Jim.
Hello, Jim.
Hello, sir. I am certainly glad to be talking to you. I'm a fan of William Federer, and also I read David Barton. Well, watch David Barton. But the president I want to talk about is Lefty Tocqueville, who rode around. As you well know, that he rode around in Horseback, 1831, and he wrote in that book, Democracy in America, that he wrote 3 tenets that all Americans used to know back in those days. And the first tenet was the evidences and doctrines of his or her own religion. The second tenet was the history, and I want to say the godly and biblical and church history of the nation. And the third tenet was the leading features of the Constitution. And every man, these are his words, that every man in America was educated in all 3 of those things. Today, we have, number 1, the doctrines and evidences of our religion, but I'm sorry to say the church people, and I love the church people, I am one of the church people, but we don't know number 2 and number 3. I'd like to hear your comments. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. There's again, a lot of this comes back to failing to learn from history, but also failing to teach history, the true history. And our earliest founders, I think a majority of them were Bible-believing Christians, and I appreciate the ministries of people like the teachings of David Barton and others who want to continue to try to get more history out in front of kids and in front of people who maybe did not learn that in schools. Because the earliest pastors were trained in the universities. They were also representatives in our government, but they were trained pastors. They were theologians. I mean, if you go back to the first several decades when America was founded, you can look at some of their theology, and my goodness, they knew more than a lot of pastors and religious leaders know today, and yet they ended up taking a secular role in government. So thank you for that call. We need to continue to raise awareness about the lack of understanding of our true unedited history.
Hey, Michelle in Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for calling Eagle Forum Live. Please go right ahead.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Dr. Schlafly. How are you, ma'am?
Okay.
I remember reading your book, and No Higher Power, and I actually have 2 comments, one on the children and then one on the social justice, if I may. On the children front, there's a court case that you mentioned, the Supreme Court. If you could expand a little bit on that once a child enters public school, the state says they have more rule over the child than the parent does. What was meant in that Supreme Court case that allowed that?
Well, I don't know which Supreme Court case you mean, but certainly the schools try to run the child. For example, we've had a big fight that Eagle Forum waged about the nosy questionnaires the schools kept asking the children. And we told the children that was a matter of parental rights. Schools shouldn't be asking those. So we told the kids not to answer the questions. So I think parents should be respected in the schools and respected for what they want to do about their own children.
Well, we have a number of callers here, including Florence, listening in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for calling Eagle Forum Live, Florence.
Hello, Florence.
Hi. I would agree that as Christians we need to try and influence the culture, but I have difference with your opinion about what you said about the Chinese lady comparing Common Core to communism. For one thing, there's a lot of critical thinking going on in Common Core that would not be going on in Communist Chinese. And also, she talks about data mining, and I've done a lot of research, and as a teacher, I'm not data mining, and state after state is saying that they are not. And also, people are saying Common Core is indoctrination. There may be indoctrination in the curriculum, but I've been offering online at many places $250 to anyone who can find one instance of indoctrination in the kindergarten through 8th grade language arts, and not one person has been able to tell me one item of indoctrination. And also, there is not a national curriculum. And in fact, places like Teacher Pay Teachers a few teachers have made over $1 million selling their curriculum ideas. So it's not a national curriculum. So I just wanted to address...
All right, we've got the point, and why don't you pair into that right now, David?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for the call. Both of my parents were educators for 30 years, and it was a completely different NEA back then in the 60s and even the 70s. But just because something is not being implemented yet does not mean it is not coming down the road as part of Common Core curriculum. And the government will, from my understanding, through the tests, and you remember, a test is what guide and lead the curriculum. They will eventually have access to private records and sensitive information about the student and or his family or her family. You can look up some of these articles. I think Washington Times and other reputable sources have talked about this already. It may not be happening now, and you might be one of the teachers that are more cautious about this, which is good. But it's just not enough time in the day to refute the point that the government schools today are not indoctrinating the children. I think, Phyllis, you've done a lot of great work on that issue, so I cannot possibly speak to that in a limited amount of time.
Jacquie joins Eagle Forum Live from Omaha, Nebraska. Hello.
Hi, Jacquie.
Hi. Great to talk to you. I just wonder what his practical advice is for people out there who are there some steps in the book for people to take?
Well, my first advice is teach your child to read. Because if your child can't read, he's never going to be educated. He's never going to be able to read any of the important books of history or even math. You really ought to go over the children's homework as they're coming home from Common Core, because it's a shock to most parents.
Walla Walla, Washington. Hello, Kevin. Thank you for calling Eagle Forum Live. Please go right ahead, sir.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Phyllis. Big fan. Love your work. My question is on the large, massive migration that's going on. And I had just finished The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, where he states in the book clearly that if you want to take over a country, you don't send an army. It's too expensive. That you invade it with your immigrants. And when I read that, it was shocking that that's exactly what's going on now. But I've never heard anybody make the connection to Machiavelli.
Well, thank you for making that connection for us.
Hey, Phyllis, can I work in another email question? We get a number of them here. Eleanor, Reno, Nevada, asking on eagleforum.org, how can I speak up without being brash and hurtful and becoming part of the problem?
A lot of us don't have that problem.
Yeah. David?
Yes, well, 2 Corinthians 4:13 says, we believe, and therefore we speak. And we each need to individually make the decision, who are we trying to please, who are we seeking approval of? In Galatians 1:10, it asks, are we seeking the approval of God or man?
Now, Gary from Boston, Massachusetts is writing into eagleforum.org. Does the United Nations do anything to silence Christians?
You're going to have to look up a little information on the UN Agenda 21, and there's a lot of things coming down the road, but the United Nations is absolutely involved in implementing public education in America, UNESCO, and there's other things I think you should do some research on and find out how they are against Christianity. So, of course, they do not want us to speak out. They do not want us to promote our biblical values. So, yes, they're indirectly, if not directly, trying to silence Christians, and that is not just in public schools.
We've been talking today with David Fiorazo about the cost of silence, of Christian silence.
Join Phyllis online at eagleforum.org. This radio program is a presentation of Eagle Forum.